So you may know that I'm currently making it my mission to watch every single Oscar Best Picture winner. And The Great Ziegfeld is actually the first one that I've watched from the beginning. This was released in 1936, where I've read the description and thought, this actually sounds like my kind of film. Even if this wasn't a Best Picture winner, I would actively watch it. And I have to say, I can understand why it won. We'll look at what it was up against in a minute to see what the competition was like. But it's not the best film ever. But it's still pretty good. So as I said, it was released in 1936. It won the Best Picture Oscar at the Academy Awards in 1937. And at the time, it was up against quite a few films. A Tale of Two Cities, Anthony Adverse, Dodsworth, Libeled Lady, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Romeo and Juliet, San Francisco, The Story of Louis Pasteur, and Three Smart Girls. I've heard of 3 of those, maybe 4. I recognise a couple of other titles. And just based on first impressions of what the other films are kind of about, I feel like this one is the most extravagant. Of course, haven't seen the others. Maybe I will also watch them at some point. It's worth noting as well that this also won Best Dance Direction, which is a very interesting category, and Best Actress in a Leading Role, which went to Luise Rayner. And the film itself is about Florenz Ziegfeld, or Flo Ziegfeld, who is a theatre producer. He produced primarily stage reviews, and it's a biopic of his life. Now, I love these kind of films, and this is good. It's a nice way of doing it. I'll talk about it in a bit more detail, but it's not as good as ones that I've seen that have come in later years, such as The Seven Little Foys, Yankee Doodle Dandy. They are great examples of how to do this kind of film. This one had its ups and downs, but for the most part, it was enjoyable. It was directed by Robert C. Leonard, written by William Anthony McGuire, and stars William Powell as Florenz Ziegfeld Jr. And I think, definitely to its credit, it does the passing of time very well. It starts in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair, and we see Ziegfeld basically trying to steal audiences from somebody else who is also at the World's Fair, and over the years he gains fortunes, he loses money, he gets into debt, he has big extravagant shows, and it's all about the ups and downs of his life as a producer and the shows that he puts on. For me, Ziegfeld as a character was certainly very interesting. I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of him until this, so I can't say whether or not I thought Powell's performance was what I would have expected from an interpretation of Ziegfeld. But certainly I enjoyed his performance, I enjoyed his mannerisms, I thought he had a great range of emotion. He was a very entertaining character and very likeable, not without his flaws, but still very entertaining. The dances weren't as impressive as I'd hoped. They were quite slow. That's not to say the dancers weren't talented. I just think the choreography could have been a little bit better. Now, I don't know if they are mimicking actual choreography from Ziegfeld's reviews, or if this is just fresh choreography created for the film, but I feel like a lot of it was quite flat and not that interesting. There was one tap performance which I loved. It's mostly showgirls, but there was a tap performance which I just thought was one of my favourite scenes. The costumes were beautiful, absolutely, definitely beautiful, and a lot of the set designs, specifically for the performances, were colossal. They were extravagant, and they did look amazing. And I would love to have been an extra on this, just in the auditorium, enjoying these shows, because I think being there, even with the dances not being too extravagant or complicated or complex, it still would have been very enjoyable. I kind of was able to sense the atmosphere and the audience's excitement when things were going really well. There were a few moments that people would question now. There was a circus bit with an elephant. There was a blackface moment, which obviously for today would not go down very well. But again, it's a product of its time, and we need to, learn from these things. We keep them in so that we learn and look and think, wow, did people ever actually get away with that? And yes, they did. The circuses, the lion, there was a lion in it. In terms of films from MGM, it's not their finest. It's not their best. But from the year, given the fact that this was in the 30s, the transitions into talkies was well underway at this point, but there's still a lot of, obviously, experimentation with doing musicals and films that employ, a lot of singing and choreography where you're meant to actually feel like you're in the auditorium. I think it did well for itself, and I can see why it won. It is long. It is so long. The overture went on for 5 minutes, and I hadn't realised the length of the film at this point. And once the overture had been about 5 minutes, I looked at the time, and it was 3 hours. I thought, okay, this is going to be a long film, and the pacing isn't perfect. It's not high intensity from start to finish. It does mellow out. And if you're not too bothered about specific characters or their outcomes, then there are times when it just goes really quite slowly. But it's enjoyable enough and worth sticking with. There is actually an intermission about halfway through, so if you get to the intermission card and wanted to pause it and pee, that's a pretty good time to do it. It's a good film. It's a long film. It's well put together. We have a good mix of performances and moments of Ziegfeld's actual life outside of the theatre. Some very talented actors and dancers in this. Some of the choreography was pretty engaging. The only song that I liked in this was 20 Gallons of Milk. That's the only song that stuck out for me and is still in my head. But I wasn't watching it for, the entertainment of a musical. I was watching it for the Oscars. But for me, this is the kind of thing where I watch it for the biopic. I didn't watch Yankee Doodle Dandy for the music. I watched it for the information. But as it happens, Yankee Doodle Dandy is incredible. The Great Ziegfeld I wouldn't call incredible, but I would say it's pretty great, and I would agree that it deserved the Oscar.